Chapter 1. The Flame is Lit. Part 4. The Weight of Truth. The sword slipped from Aldric's grasp, its weight crashing to the ground with a soft but definitive thud. The sound cut through the silence of the clearing, and immediately the men around the campfire sprang to their feet, their hands flying to their weapons. "Who's there?" one of them barked, his eyes darting through the trees, scanning the darkness. But Aldric didn't move. His entire world had collapsed in that one moment, his heart hammering against his ribs as the man's words echoed in his mind. Sold. His sister Elswyth sold into slavery. The image of her bright smile, her laughing eyes, clashed violently with the thought of her bound in chains, her spirit crushed under the weight of cruel hands. He couldn't breathe. The fire that had burned so fiercely in his chest, fueling his vengeance, now flickered dangerously close to going out. Aldric's legs trembled beneath him, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a leaden cloak. His mind raced, searching for some way to deny what he had just heard. But there was no escaping it. The men knew. They knew something about the bandits who had taken her, about the fate she might have suffered. And that meant they were his only link to finding her, to avenging his family. The fire reignited, hotter, more furious than before. Aldric stood slowly, the men's eyes locked on him as he stepped out from the trees and into the clearing. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready to spring into action, but he forced himself to remain calm. They needed to talk before he let his rage loose. The man closest to the fire was tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard that nearly covered his entire face. His hand was on the hilt of a short sword, but he hadn't drawn it yet. His eyes narrowed as he looked Aldric up and down. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice low and threatening. "What do you want?" Aldric didn't answer immediately. His gaze flicked between the 5 men, noting their positions, their weapons. They were outnumbered but not unbeatable. If things went wrong, he could fight his way out, he was sure of that. But first he needed answers. "I heard what you said," Aldric finally spoke, his voice sharp despite the emotions swirling inside him. His eyes locked onto the bearded man. "About the girl." The men exchanged uneasy glances, and the tension in the air thickened. They knew what he was talking about. That much was clear. But the way they shifted on their feet, the furtive looks they cast at each other, told Aldric one thing. They weren't going to give up that information easily. The bearded man stepped forward, his hand still on his sword, though he made no move to draw it. "And what of it?" he asked, his voice gruff. "What's it to you?" Aldric took a slow breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Every fibre of his being screamed at him to lash out, to demand answers, but he forced the anger down, keeping his focus sharp. "The girl you spoke of, where did they take her?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. The man's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing further. "What makes you think we'd know anything about that?" "Because I heard you," Aldric replied, his gaze unwavering. "You mentioned the village, Bromwich. I'm from there. You said she might have been sold." His voice wavered slightly on the last word, but he didn't let the fear or grief show in his face. He couldn't afford weakness now, not when he was this close. One of the other men, a shorter fellow with a scar across his cheek, snorted. "You think we're the ones who took her? You've got the wrong group, boy. We weren't part of that raid." Aldric's jaw clenched, his hand hovering near the hilt of his father's sword. He was ready for a fight, but there was something in the man's tone, a defensive note that rang true. Maybe they weren't the ones who had attacked his village, but they knew something. They had to. The bearded man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "Look, we didn't take your sister," he said, his tone softening just slightly. "But we heard rumours about the raid on Bromwich. Bandits hit it, took what they could, killed most of the people there. If the girl you're talking about was taken, then it's possible, likely even, that she was sold." "Where?" Aldric demanded, his voice tight. The bearded man hesitated, glancing at his companions before answering. "The slave markets. There's a network mostly operating in the southern towns. The slavers work in the shadows, so you won't find them easily. But they're out there buying and selling people like cattle." Aldric's stomach churned at the thought of his sister being treated like that, sold off to the highest bidder. The fire in his chest flared, burning hotter than ever before. He could feel his anger rising, threatening to take control, but he swallowed it down. He needed to stay calm. He needed more information. "Do you know where the slavers are now?" Aldric asked, his voice low. The bearded man shook his head. "No, but I know someone who might." He paused, glancing at his comrades again, as if considering whether he should continue. "There's a man, Edric. He used to run with some of the slaver gangs, but he's since gone to ground. Word is he's hiding out in a village to the south near the river. If you find him, he might be able to tell you more." Aldric's heart raced. It wasn't much, but it was a lead, a small thread that he could pull to unravel the mystery of his sister's fate. His hand relaxed slightly, though the tension in his body remained. "And why should I trust you?" Aldric asked, his eyes narrowing. The bearded man shrugged, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to, but if you want to find the girl, it's your best shot. No one else is going to help you." Aldric's mind raced, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had no reason to trust these men, but they had given him something, a name, a location. It was more than he had before, and if there was even the slightest chance that this Edric could lead him to Elswyth, then he had to take it. After a long moment, Aldric nodded, stepping back. "If I find out you've lied to me—" He left the threat hanging in the air, his voice cold and sharp as the edge of his blade. The bearded man held his gaze for a moment before nodding slowly. "I haven't." Aldric turned away, his mind already focused on his next steps. He needed to find Edric, and once he did, he would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As Aldric left the clearing, his body ached with exhaustion, but his resolve had never been stronger. His steps were deliberate, each one carrying him farther away from Bromwich and closer to the unknown dangers ahead. The path was uncertain, and the shadows of doubt crept at the edges of his mind. But the image of Elswyth, the thought of her in chains, drove him forward. His father's sword hung heavy at his side, a constant reminder of the duty he had taken upon himself. This journey wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't just about the rage that burned in his chest, demanding justice for the family he had lost. It was about Elswyth. And as long as there was even the faintest hope that she was alive, Aldric would not stop.